So, Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi just won a massive election victory in 2026, and she sort of swept the board and brought the LDP to a historic high when they've won the greatest number of seats that any party has ever since the war. So that's been talked about a lot. But what's not been talked about quite as much is how the LDP doing this has also led to an absolutely devastating result for the left. And a situation where basically at the moment the left in Japan barely exists at all. So I want to look at that. Now, in Japan, there's a total of 465 seats in the lower house, the primary house of Japan. Now, Japan's right, that's Sanae Takaichi with a massive record-breaking win of 316. That is there, and there's also another her coalition partner on 36. There's Sanzato on 15, and there's the Tax Cut Party on just 1. So that leads to a situation where the Japanese right in Japan has a total of 368 out of 465 seats. Incredible. It's quite crowded now in the centre with 3 parties. They have 88 seats. And also you have here Japan's left, 4 and 1, only 5 seats in total. So you can see how they've just been absolutely wiped out as a result of this. Now, this is largely because the CDP has sort of rebranded itself before the election and became the CRA, the Centrist Reform Alliance. As a result of that, they've sort of very hastily had to sort of rebrand, move themselves to the centre, give up on principles they held for a long time, sort of left-wing principles like opposing nuclear energy. And they did that in a very short campaign. And I think that sort of left people a bit uncertain of where they stood. They felt it, maybe some people felt it was a little bit quite calculated and, you know, and I suppose insincere to suddenly say, oh, we're a centrist party, to sort of try and take votes from the LDP and position themselves as sort of a more moderate centre party to try and win an election. People haven't really taken that well to that, and they lost a lot of seats. But it also means that this party is no longer a left-wing party, having been so for years. And so you have a situation where there's the Communist Party who've lost seats and they're down to only 4. And they're in a quite bad position because the brand of being, you know, a communist party in Japan, it sort of mainly appeals to mostly older voters who've been that for years. And you'd say the support of the Communist Party in Japan tends to be a bit older. So they're failing really to gain any traction. And election after election, they're losing seats. So the Communist Party is sort of trapped in a situation where they can't appeal to new voters and they're sort of gradually dwindling and going away. There's Reiwa, who for years had a couple of good elections in a row. They were sort of a growing party, and I thought they might actually do okay because they had momentum. They had a very charismatic leader, Taro Yamamoto. They'd had a bit of momentum and had picked up a few wins. So I thought of all the left-wing parties, they would be the ones who would hang on and maybe even gradually grow, even if the country was generally going towards the right and voting for the LDP. That's not happened, I think largely because, unfortunately, of the health problems of the leader, Taro Yamamoto, which has meant, although he's still the leader of the party, he sort of has given up his seat and has sort of stepped back a little bit. And I think you'd have to say there's a chance that him maybe being less active, given his sort of big personality and how he founded the party, he's very much tied to it, that might have led to them not doing as well in the election. And so Ray was in a situation where they've only got 1 seat. They lost a number of seats in the 2026 election, and they've effectively stalled, and they've lost the momentum they had going forward. And they're in a position where their popular leader, as I say, has stepped back, and so they're sort of not having his leadership benefit them as much. And there's finally the SDP, who don't even have any seats in the lower house anymore, despite their sort of long history. So they're effectively off the board, really, as a major party in Japan. So there's a situation, as I say, where there's a complete lack of major party who you'd think would be a natural opposition for this big LDP party going forward. Now, as they say, nature abhors a vacuum, and I think this is a situation where there really is no left in Japan, and there's no obvious party here to capitalise if the LDP were ever to lose popularity. And I think the LDP are on such an incredible historic high, 316 seats, that even if they do moderately well, I think it's almost inevitable at some point they're going to go down because they're at such an incredibly high level. And you'd think, given the sort of the trend of history and how politics tends to sort of swing between the left and the right, and that given there's so many parties here, like sort of it crowded in the centre, you'd think eventually at least some of that is going to swing back towards the left wing in Japan. You think it's hard to imagine that it stays at such a low ebb of only 5 seats in the lower house forever. And so the question is, if none of these are in a good position to take advantage, if there ever is that sweep back, who could it be? Well, I think it's highly likely that either a brand new party emerges out of nowhere, or I think there's a very strong possibility, something that could happen, is all the dissatisfied people from within the old CDP party, who were a major left-wing party, who, as I say, have now changed their name, the Centrist Reform Alliance, they've moved to the centre. I think either a number of the people who lost their seats might think about forming a new party, and there might even be a situation where some who are in Parliament now as the Centrist Reform Alliance, normally on the centre, they might say we're unhappy with the situation and they're going to defect and possibly move to a new party. I'm not saying that's inevitable, but I think it's a move that would make a lot of sense given marketing to the centre hasn't gone well, and there's a lot of them who might well have not wanted to do this in the first place. Now, if either there is a sort of a party that brands themselves as a successor to the CDP and sort of takes that party's position on the left, or if there is a brand new party, I think they would do very well to have a clear, disciplined message. I mean, I think generally in 2026, the parties that had sort of a clear identity and it was obvious to sort of the Japanese electorate and who communicated themselves well, they tended to do well. Whereas parties like the Centrist Reform Alliance, where they sort of hastily rebranded themselves, changed their identity, and what they were offering was a bit muddled, they did badly. So I think they do very well to focus on a few core issues, left-wing issues, to sort of oppose the LDP and make themselves distinct to all these sort of centrist parties in the middle, to offer that to the Japanese electorate. They could do something like maybe have a very clear anti-nuclear position, given that the LDP is quite pro-nuclear at the moment, and there's a talk of a lot of nuclear power plants starting back up in Japan. So they could sort of target areas where people are unhappy that there's going to be a nuclear power plant possibly starting in their proximity, or there's rumours or suspicions there might be. That's something they could go after. They could maybe take an anti-war stance, given that the LDP are planning to invest a lot in the SDP and building up Japan's military, and there might even be a referendum to make the military legal in Japan. They could say they're sort of the anti-war party. They don't want sort of this tension with China. They could position themselves against that. That's a position they could have. Or they could do something like go after Sanae Takaichi on the economy and say, you know, you're creating a situation where there's a weak yen, you're not addressing sort of the cost of living in Japan, you're not doing enough to help ordinary Japanese. They could sort of have a sort of a left-wing economic message. But I think those are some things they could do to, like, as I say, just make it clear that you have a new left-wing identity. I think there's a real vacancy here for a party to emerge, given that the left wing in Japan is on such a low ebb. And I think it will be very interesting to see what comes in the future to fill this vacuum. Will it be one of these existing parties on a very low seat number who are currentry struggling? Could they sort of revitalise themselves and emerge to fill that gap? Or could there be something new, either from, as I say, the CDP re-emerging itself as a new party, you know, those members who are not be happy with this, making something new? Could that happen? Or could it be something entirely new emerging out of nowhere to sort of capture the left? But be very interesting to see over the next few years if that happens, and, as I say, who fills this gap.